I'm touched. I mean, I wish my wife was here to see this. God, thank you for coming. John Sununu is here, the Senator John Sununu, my dear friend. He is here with us. Of course, former, but never former, always Attorney General Tom Rath is here today. Okay, so let me try to be shorter. All my folks say, be shorter, okay? So I'll try to be short, but I want to tell you a story about who I am that'll illustrate kind of my lifetime. So I grew up in this little town called McKees Rocks, as our host said, and my father did carry mail on his back, and his father was a coal miner, and a bunch of kids, and they didn't have a lot. In fact, my grandfather, my Uncle George tells me, used to bring some of his lunch home from the coal mine, because he knew his kids needed some more to eat. And my Uncle George said that when he would bring that lunch home and they would eat it, they would even be able to taste the coal mine in that lunch. And some of you can relate to that if you've had family that did those kind of things. My mother was a very smart woman, but never went to college because that's just not what they did. And her mother could barely speak English, but my mother was very opinionated and very, very smart. And so this was a town where if the wind blew the wrong way, people would find themselves out of work. And it was all Democrat. I mean, they said my Uncle Harry was a Republican, but we didn't pay much attention to Uncle Harry. And my mother became a Republican later in life, but I have to tell you that the anxiety that Americans feel today, it's what I grew up with. You know, you're going to get to keep a job, and here's what it really gets down to. Can my kid grow up to be something special? Or is the system so gamed against us that we can't get there? And of course, I'm one example of where it happened. I mean, the Lord's been good to me. So I leave McKees Rocks, this little town, and I go to a small little school in the Midwest called Ohio State. Some of you may have heard of it. And I was in a dormitory, 23 floors high, with 15 college roommates. And things didn't go exactly the way I wanted to, so I decided to start at the top and called for a meeting with the president of the university. And after bugging them long enough, they let me in. So I went in to see the president, and he was a very impressive guy with a beautiful office, beautiful desk and carpeting and furniture and the whole deal. And I looked at him after I told him what was on my mind, and I said, "Sir, I've been in school here for about a month, and I'm undecided at Ohio State. But looking at your assistant here, your beautiful office, maybe this is the job for me. You know, what exactly do you do?" And so he tells me about his responsibilities, academic and fundraising, and he tells me the next day he's going to go down to have a meeting with President Nixon. And I said, "Sir, there's a number of things that I would like to talk to him about. Also, could I go with you?" And he said, "No." And I said, "But if I write a letter, would you give it to the president?" Now, he had never seen me before, so there's a story in there of keep asking until somebody tells you no. And he said he would carry this letter. So I went back to my dorm and wrote a letter to the President of the United States, basically inviting myself to the White House. So a couple weeks later, I go down to my mailbox, and there's a letter from the White House, the office of the President. I open it up, and I go upstairs, and I call home. And my mother answers the phone. I said, "Mom, I'm going to need an airline ticket. The President of the United States would like to have a meeting with me in the Oval Office." And my mother is shouting, "Honey, pick up the phone. Something is wrong with Johnny." So to make a long story short, I go back to Pittsburgh for the winter break. They buy me an airline ticket. I fly to Washington. I get through the gate. I go into the White House, and I am sitting on a little desk, or a little couch that is, last time I checked, is still there. And a guy walks up to me and he says, "Young man, you're going to get 5 minutes alone with the President of the United States. I'm 18 years old. What do you think?" What do you think of that? That's pretty good. What do you think? Amazing. Tell you what I'm thinking. I got a new jacket, a new shirt, new tie, and new pants. I'm not coming out in 5 lousy minutes. Forget it. I mean, seriously, that's the way I was raised, right? So I walk in, I meet the president, he meets me, and the good news is I sit down at his desk, and I spent 20 minutes alone with the President of the United States as an 18-year-old freshman. That's the good news. The bad news is I spent 18 years in Congress, and if you add up all the time I spent in the Oval Office, I peaked out at the age of 18 and should have moved to Derry. So we have some young people here. That's a beautiful story, isn't it? It's a beautiful story because it says that things can happen. Never sell yourself short. Don't ever sell yourself short. You have big dreams, you live them. And I'll tell you another thing I believe firmly. I believe that the Lord has a purpose for all of us. For all of us. And we're made unique. And the key to satisfaction in life is to dig down and figure out what that purpose is. And be able to move in that direction. And you're never too old to figure that out, by the way. You could be 90 years old and discover your purpose. And that's our job here on earth, really, to bring justice and a healing to to where we live. And it doesn't have to, you don't be president to do it, just do it because it's what amen, right? Right, ma'am? That's what it's about. So anyway, that story is like lightning striking me, and it struck me many, many times. In 1976, I went to the Republican convention in Kansas City. A guy I was working for in the legislature was one of the brain trusts of the Reagan campaign. And he called me up and he said, I'm out here, I can't handle all my responsibilities. Would you fly out here to Kansas City and help me? So I fly out there and I walk in the door of this command center. There's this little trailer set up. And they had all the geniuses of the Reagan campaign in there. And I walked in to help this guy and they looked at me and they said, one of our people didn't show up. Do you think you could handle 5 states for Governor Reagan? I, of course, had no idea what that meant, but my answer was, of course I could. And so my job was to go with the governor and introduce him before these delegations and try to get them to go for Reagan in 1976. Well, Reagan lost, but he was inspiring. And he said he would be back. And what an experience. I went back to Ohio and I thought, I can't stay in this job in the legislature, I'll just run. So I quit my job at the age of about 24 and a half. Never told my mom because she would have thought I was crazy. So I run, and it was against very tall odds. I win. I'm now the youngest state senator in Ohio history. 2 years later, I become the chairman of the Health Committee, and I'm the youngest chairman in Ohio history. And the other house was Democrat. Now, I got 2 choices. I can either be a Republican or I could be an Ohioan. And I chose to be an Ohioan. Now, I happen to be a Republican, but the Republican Party is my vehicle and not my master. I don't take orders from something on high to tell me how to behave. I'm in politics to bring about improvements in our society, and I've always been that way. So I served those 4 years, and then in 1982 I ran for Congress. And I ran on the Reagan platform, cutting taxes, balancing budgets, defeating the Soviets. And Reagan was very unpopular in 1982, to the point where Republicans lost 26 congressional seats that year. But there was one person who defeated an incumbent Democrat in America, and it was me. So at the age of 30, I'm headed to Washington. So I get on the Defense Committee. And to tell you the truth, there was no seats on any of the committees. And Tip O'Neill made a deal with the Republicans to create an extra seat on the Armed Services Committee. How unbelievable. And so I get on there, and I'm on there a very short period of time, and I'm meeting with this military official, this colonel, and he shows me hammers, screwdrivers, and wrenches that cost tens of thousands of dollars. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I went down to Congress with all this paraphernalia. And I showed the chairman of the committee all these things. And he was from Alabama. He'd had a leg blown off in World War II. He believed completely in the military. And when I showed him all this, it was very unsettling to him, because he couldn't figure out how this was happening. And he pulled his glasses down over his nose and he looked at me and he said, your mama don't have any more like you at home, does she? So I became, at that point, a military reformer, a strong military, an effective military, but let's cut the waste out. We can't afford waste anywhere. 6 years I served on that committee before I got on the budget committee. Then I get on the budget committee. I'm home in Westerville, and I'm putting gasoline in my Jeep. And I'm talking to the owner, and I'm talking about how bad the budget committee is, because I went to a couple budget meetings and nobody wanted to do anything. So this guy walks around the gas tank, and he looks at me, and he says, if things are so bad, what are you going to do about it? So I flew down to Washington, and I called my staff in. I said, we're going to write a budget for the United States of America. And they said, okay, at the White House, they have like 100 people writing the budget, and they have about that many up on Capitol Hill, and we only have 6 people. I said, I understand that we're overstaffed, but if we stay out of each other's way, we could write a budget. So we wrote a budget for America. And the vote on the budget was 405 against and 30 yes in favor. So in other words, only 30 people voted for me and 405 voted against me. Now how do you think I'm doing at this point? Not so good, she said. Well, I'll tell you what I was thinking. I got 29 other people that think I can run America, so we're up and running. And so we started working. And here's what I've learned. If you run on principle and it's one that works, if it's legitimate, you stay at it and at it and at it, and the more they beat you up, the more you get a crowd that tries to help you. And 10 years later, I sat with the Clinton people, Senator Domenici and I was one of the chief architects of balancing the federal budget. Actually got it done since it was the first time we had done it since man walked on the moon, and we have not done it since. We paid down the largest amount of the national publicly held debt in modern times. We cut taxes on investment and risk-taking. And when I left Washington, we had a $5 trillion surplus that was blown. So I left Congress. I left politics. I thought I was done with it. And I went out and did these other things. I worked for Lehman Brothers as a banker. I traveled over the country helping businesses to be stronger. And then you all remember what a huge star I was at Fox News. Okay? I was big. And if any of you don't remember that, I've got tapes out in the car. You can take them. And I'll tell you what happened. After being out and writing books and, all these things that I always never thought I could ever do. Did you ever get that call? Did you ever get that feeling? There's more I have to do? So I told my wife I wanted to run for governor. And she said, so see if I understand this. You want to go back into politics. Good news is she let me move back in last week. But I told her that we have to do what we have to do. So I go in, run for governor, and it is extremely difficult. We hadn't beaten any incumbent of any party in 36 years. The state was way in the hole. We had lost 350,000 jobs, and we were just losing hope. So I went to work in the same way that I did it in Washington. And here's how it works, folks. Seriously, I know you're not going to believe this, or maybe I would wish you could believe it. There's no favorites. When you go to balance a budget or reform or change things, you can't have people trying to tell you what to do. And you can't be in a position where somebody gets an angle on you, because you're going to have to affect a lot of things. And if you start carving out favorites, if you're a baseball coach and you put your son as a pitcher when he can't throw, you got no credibility as a coach. And that's the way it is as when you try to do things with budgets. So no favorites. We looked at, because here's one of the secrets that people don't know because they've never done this work. You don't necessarily have to slash things to get there. You can make things work better. And I'll give you one example. My Medicaid program in Ohio was growing at 9% when I came in. And in this budget, it's growing by less than 4%. We did not throw one person off the program or cut one benefit, because we figured out a way to modernize it, to think differently. And so we went to work. And after my first year, I had a 28% approval rating. Now, I have to tell you, You got to work to be that unpopular, okay? And I think at one point I was the most unpopular governor in America. I didn't really mind that, to tell you the truth, because I wasn't there to get reelected or anything like that. And so we went to work, and guess what? 4 years later, 4.5 years later now, we went from $8 billion in the hole to a $2 billion surplus. We've cut taxes by almost $5 billion, the largest in the country of any sitting governor. We included in that was we killed the death tax so you could transfer your hard earnings onto your kids. And we're working on killing death. We haven't figured that one out yet. And we, small businesses in Ohio will pay no income tax, almost all of them. And we've lowered the rates, and we've also provided incentives for people at the bottom, the working poor. We want their work to mean something for them. Now here's the other thing. Because we're doing better, we are helping people who have traditionally lived in the shadows and people ignore. If you're mentally ill, we're going to treat you. We have 10,000 mentally ill people in our prisons. There are more people sitting in prisons in America than in psychiatric hospitals. People who are bipolar or schizophrenic. Anybody in here know anybody like that? Who's schizophrenic or bipolar? We don't want to raise our hands, do we? We should, okay? But we do. And with the proper medication, they can live a normal life. And they don't belong in a jail cell or a prison cell. If they're drug addicted, first of all, we're running programs to tell kids not to do drugs. If you are drug addicted, we're going to rehab you and get you on your feet. If you're the working poor, we're going to give you health care so you don't show up in the emergency room sicker and more costly, which we all have to pay for. If you're autistic, we're going to get you insurance. If you're developmentally disabled, we're going to mainstream you because everyone has a right to live their God-given purpose. And if you are in the minority community, we're going to help to create entrepreneurship and opportunity. So I was at that 28% approval. I ran for re-election, as was pointed out. First of all, I won 86 out of 88 counties, including Cuyahoga County, which Obama won by 40 points. I won 26% of the African American vote, 51% of union households, and 60% of women. And why did it happen? It happened, number one, because hope has gone back to Ohio. People know they got a shot, a chance to get work, because that's the most important thing that a public official can do is create the environment for job creation. That's our highest moral purpose. When people work, the family's stronger, the kids are better, right? Everybody rises. And then, secondly, though, I think by and large people feel in Ohio like they're not being ignored. They got a shot, no matter who they are. They got a shot at a decent life. And that's the way America ought to be. That's what we should be doing, is lifting people. So 3 things if I were elected. 1, you got to get to a balanced budget. You don't do it tomorrow, but you get on a path so that this economy will grow. Number 2, we need to strengthen the military because it's been run down over a series of years now, and America's got to have a strong military. And number 3, we got to give everybody a sense that they're included, that the miracle of America doesn't just apply to a few. We unify this country, and we're going to be okay. But these are things we have to do. And finally, I guess the 4th thing that I'm going to add here today is it's you. What's happened to the sense of citizenship in our country? I'll tell you how you can revive it. You see a kid walking down the street and may not know. Say, "Excuse me, young man, don't do drugs." You see somebody, a neighbor that was married for 57 years and they lose their spouse. Are you over there spending a little time with them? Kids, do you ever go out and visit the nursing home? Give people a little lift. They love to see young people. We need this again because America is strong when we go bottom up, not top down. I mean, you can run for president. Questions? I'm done. You can give me polite applause. And then too. Wind and solar. And I tell you, I think if we could put a windmill outside of every state house in America, think of the power that that would generate, okay? But see, he's on to something. He's on to something. You really are. Lower priced energy is another factor. So if all of a sudden you can power heavy manufacturing with low price fuel, then you're going to have more companies wanting to come here. And we're selling natural gas in Ohio, and frankly, we ought to be doing it all across this country. And by the way, I'll be promoting building a pipeline and sending you more natural gas up here if you'll pay us a lot of money. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, yes, right here, miss, or whoever's back there.
Okay, I'm more of a libertarian. I'm a Republican, but I'm a libertarian. I believe that the federal government has almost no right in my life. In particular, education, Common Core. So I homeschooled my daughter. She intends to homeschool her daughter, her children. If Common Core becomes as pervasive as it seems to be, it's my understanding that the SATs, for instance, have already started changing their questions to reflect Common Core curriculum. As a homeschooler, one of the options that we love to have is to choose our own curriculum. If I don't choose Common Core for my child, or my daughter doesn't choose it for her child, they're not going to get into a very good school. So I know you're in favor of Common Core.
Well, let me explain to what it is and how it works, okay? And this gets to be not only about intuition, but it also gets to be about facts. I'm actually reading a C.S. Lewis book about this, which is so complicated. I hope I explain it right. But here's what happened. There was a guy who was the governor of Georgia by the name of Sonny Perdue. You don't become governor of Georgia if you're a liberal, okay? Sonny Perdue got together with a Democrat governor, and they said the standards that we have in education in America are too low, and we're not competing worldwide. 40% of the students in my state, and I think it's probably true here, when they graduate from high school are not prepared to go to college. They're in remedial education, and you worry about the cost of higher education. You know what it costs for a university or a community college to train people for the things that the students should have learned when they were in school? So they brought in state education officials, and they came up with a series of standards. Now, in Ohio, we only have two. We have math and we have English. These standards in my state have been raised because the state of Massachusetts, believe it or not, has some of the highest standards in the country and have some of the best performing kids. High standards matter. See, what's happened is a lot of people want to have lower standards so more kids can jump over the bar because we all want to live in Lake Wobegon. So here's what we do in Ohio, and if states don't want to do it, they should be set free to do what they want. The standards in are high, but the curriculum designed to meet the higher standards is set by local school boards with parental advisors. It's not set by the governor, it's not set by the president, it's not set by anybody in Washington. It is all determined by the local school boards at the local level. Now, larger than that is the issue of all these programs in Washington, and I think they ought to be transferred back to us. And I think New Hampshire and Ohio and New York, we should be able to manage that money the way we want to. But I am not going to have low standards in Ohio because our kids are being cheated, and I want high standards. So perhaps we can talk about this so you would understand where I'm coming from. I want a president to say we need to have goals and high standards, but I don't think it ought to be run in that town. Yeah.
So statistically, as a homeschooler, homeschool kids are being pursued by Ivy League colleges, so on and so forth. They have not followed any kind of government curriculum,
right,
or met any specific standards. At least here in New Hampshire, in a lot of states, you just have to show some degree of improvement from year to year.
And I'm for homeschooling, by the way. I think it's
But it
great.
does become more difficult if there are these standards, and then especially if the SATs are going to start changing their questions to meet Common Core ideas.
Yeah, well,
our kids will not be able to be successful.
Well, that's a point I will check, because that's not what I favor. I favor my kids being able to graduate from high school and go to college and be prepared in math and English. Because you see what's happening worldwide? We are losing the competition in math and science against countries that some of us have never heard of. Because we don't have the discipline in the local education. You know, I have to, let me tell you a couple things. First of all, I'm a supporter of school vouchers. We have 60,000 school vouchers, and I believe in it passionately, and I believe in charter schools, high-performing charter schools. I think that's important. I've been involved with the city of Cleveland in taking over the Cleveland City Schools and putting in a CEO to drive high-quality education. We actually had a buyout program to buy out the teachers who were not performing and bring in the young teachers who were raring to go. And I've just been involved in passing legislation to create a CEO for Youngstown schools where they've had failure for 9 years in a row. If there's one thing I feel strong, there's a lot of things I feel strongly about, but one thing that is just, if we do not give our kids the tools they need to compete in the world, we are ripping them off, and I'm not going to be a part of it. Whether I win or I don't win or whatever, but I hear you. So we need to talk to you. We'll call you, okay? I will have the superintendent of my schools call you and talk you through this. Because I'm not quite sure also how we're treating the homeschoolers. I got to find that. I was going to make a statement, but I don't want to make one in error. So I appreciate what you're saying. It's a good point, and I'm not sucking up to you. I'm just telling you, you make a good point. Okay, right here.
Governor Kasich, in the past couple of weeks after the murder of that young woman in San Francisco, there's been a renewed interest in the so-called sanctuary cities. As president, what would you do to address the cities that refuse to cooperate with our
We need to get rid of sanctuary cities. I'm going to take the last one, way in the back. Yes, sir. Amnesty for the illegals. Here's what my immigration plan would be. Finish the wall. Part of the reason why the wall's not finished is because special interests don't want it to be filled. Some people like this process. I wouldn't care about them. We have to complete the wall. And here's, Reagan had a program in '86 to deal with this. You know what our problem was? We didn't finish the wall. But once the wall is finished, anybody comes across illegally, they're going back. No more debate or discussion. Okay, when it's done, it's done. Now, let me go on. I think we need to have a guest worker program so people can come in and go back, help their families if there's needs for this employment. And with the 11 million or 12 or 10 and a half that are here, if they've been law-abiding, then I think they should stay. And but they're going to have to pay a penalty. They're going to have to wait in line. But it's not practical, nor is it, I think, desirable. No, I think that a lot of these people who are here are some of the hardest working, God-fearing, family-oriented people you can ever meet. And that's what I think of all of them. So, okay, listen. I think we're done.